All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Nerds of Legend. We have a very special episode today. Joining us is Maria V Snyder, which some of our long-term listeners may remember her from when we did our book talk on Poison Study, which she wrote. That's a dumb way to put that, but she agreed to come on with us today, and we're really excited. And I guess let's get right into it. I don't have any housekeeping things to start off with, so we'll just dive right in. So, and to our viewers who are watching, please feel free if you have any questions for Maria, put them in the chat, and we'll ask her. So. Maria, why don't you take it away? Or sorry, Melissa, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought we had a plan. We're already off the plan, guys.
The record hard, okay?
Yes.
I screw up the intro every time. I don't know why people let me do it.
I don't know. I would happily do it, but you do so well with it. Except for that weird, at the end, you always throw a weird voice into the end of it.
It's all in the fun.
I'll throw in one housekeeping item, which is if you hear a baby, sorry, she is snoozing over there, but you may hear a little bit of cries because she's about 5 weeks old.
If I disappear from the stream, I'm soothing an irate newborn. So
yes.
Yeah, we had a crisis averted. Her binky fell out of her mouth and she was about to melt down, but we saved it.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So I'll just kind of get started. So I think, Poison Study was written about 15 years ago, right? Give or take.
It was published in 2005. Yeah, so a little bit more.
A little bit more. So, after all those years, people are still talking about it. They're still reading it. They're still, engaging in this story. And, it spawned countless spin-off series, the second trilogy, short stories, all of the things, right? So when you first wrote it, could you have imagined that you would be where you are today?
No, I had no idea. When I wrote Poison Study, I wrote it because there was like this, I love fantasy, reading fantasy and science fiction, but the fantasy was all very like Lord of the Rings, very world building heavy with all the different races and creatures and the languages and everything. And while they were wonderful, I just wanted to read about, the people. Now, and not like I didn't need 5 generations ago, this is what happened kind of thing. Yeah. And so I was like, and there wasn't a lot of female protagonists in as much fantasy back when I was reading it. So I'm thinking, okay, well, I want to do a fantasy that I would really like to read. So I thought, okay, I'm going to write this book about this food taster, and it was going to be one book. Just that one book, and it was going to be the end of it, and that's all great, and I'm going to try and find a publisher. And it took me a couple years to find a publisher, so the book was written even before it was published. And when I finally found a publisher, I was telling you about it before, like everybody's like, Harlequin, well, I didn't know this was a romance. And it's like, well, no, it's not really. But they started a whole new imprint, Luna Books, where they wanted to focus on strong female protagonists and romantic subplots. And I thought, well, I have a little bit of romance. I think Lord of the Rings has more romance than I do in my book. If you think about it.
You got Rosie.
Yes.
You've got Arwen. You've got that whole Eowyn thing,
Yes. So I submitted my book thinking, well, I have that sort of, and they loved it. And they called me up and said, we want to buy this book and it's wonderful. And you have a second book. We're going to give you a 2-book contract. Okay. And I'm like, sure.
So the publisher made it into the series. Is that what happened?
They automatically assumed I had more books. And I'm like, well, if I rewrite the ending, I could do a second book.
Okay. So your initial ending, it was like, the book did finish in one, like the whole series basically finished in the one book, but you were
right. Continue. Well, I had the caveat that she's a magician, right? Yeah. And so the commander does not want her in Thea, but then I had her fighting Valek and beating him and becoming his second. So now she had to stay because now she proved that she was,
worthy. Yeah,
worthy. Right. But my husband was like, who's an engineer, was like, no, No. I mean, she just learned how to fight 6 months ago, and she's going to beat this guy who's been fighting for 16 years and is a master swordsman. Yeah. He's like,
right.
No, I don't buy it.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, we'll see. But then when they wanted a second book, I'm like, okay, well, then I'll have her go to the Southern lands and learn about her magic. So Magic Study was a really easy title to come up with.
Yeah.
She was learning all about her magic and everything. And then when I finished Magic Study, I was like, oh, yeah, I can do a third. Yeah. So my publisher's like, yeah, do a third. Because the first two were selling really well and they wanted to keep it going.
Yeah.
So, in the end, 9 books set in that world where I was only going to write 1. Huh. So, yeah.
There you go.
And I'm just as surprised as everybody else.
That's funny. To draw little parallels with our D&D journey, one of our most recent, we had a campaign we started 3 years ago that was originally supposed to be just one shot.
One day,
one shot.
Mm-hmm.
One day, it is now 15,000 words into a book that I'm writing on it.
It turned into a year-long campaign that he is now turning into a book. So,
yeah.
I know
there's wild how it can snowball from one idea,
The funny thing is hearing you say I was originally going to write 1 book and now it's 9 is how fast it can grow, how fast those words can add up. Mm-hmm. And you're like, there's no way I could do a full book on this one. And then you look down at the page you've written, at the interaction you've written, it's 10 pages long and yet spoken is, 2 minutes. You're like,
yes.
Okay, then I can do this.
Yeah, it's interesting with my process. When I start writing, I panic that I'm not going to have enough to fill a whole novel. Mm-hmm. And so the first half of the novel, I'm worried about having enough. So I'll put in subplots and I'll put in all this other stuff and try and keep enough things going. And I'll put all these complications on. And then the second half of the book, I worry that I have too much going on. There's no way I'm going to finish this.
You don't have enough space to
right. And 100,000 words is usually what my contract is for. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, there's no way I'm going to finish this in 100,000 words. And then I get to the end and wrap everything up. And it's 100,000 words. Mm-hmm. It's wow.
That's awesome.
Some lady.
So,
I hear gravy.
Yep. So you talked about, you wanted to write the story, but what was your original, inspiration for it? I know food tasters historically is a job, right? But
yes.
I imagine it's a little bit more than that.
Well, yes. My husband, I mentioned he's an engineer. Well, he's an agricultural engineer, and he worked for Mars Chocolate, which is now Mars Wrigley, I think they call it. And he was in their research department doing cocoa raw materials. So that's where they grow, the cocoa beans, the cocoa pods, where they get the beans. And then he also was part of trying to generate new, candy bars, new ways of making the chocolate. And so that's part of his job, was tasting chocolate and then making sure it had the right consistency they were looking for, the right kind of taste and everything like that. Because if you think about it, every time you pick up a Snickers bar, it tastes the same.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It has to be the same every time.
Right. And so, there's always that coming in. So that was kind of fascinating to me, but it was always in the back of my head. So when I was looking for a main character, and I know the monarchy is a big thing in fantasy, and I was thinking of, the princess or the lord or the lady or something like that. And then I read about Orson Scott Card had a book on how to write science fiction and fantasy. And in it, he was talking about your characters. And he's like, yeah, these lords and ladies have a lot of power, but they don't have a lot of freedom. They can't just get up and go and run around, which they usually do in the books. But if you think about a real society, they didn't do that. And he said to find somebody that was close to the action, but had more freedom. And it popped in my head, a food taster. Yeah. Because they're close to the action, all meals. Yeah. And if it's anything like my house, all the drama happens during meal times.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Italian household, we're all in the kitchen the whole time we're there. And that's where all the drama is. So I thought of a food taster. And then I also had the link that I had an expert in my own house that I can talk to and get information for. Yeah. And also I read enough fantasy that I knew that it hadn't been done before.
Yeah.
And that's what fantasy readers like. They like the familiar, they like the magic, but they also like something that's unique to it. And so I was able to bring in that unique element to it.
one of the things about the story that I really did enjoy is the fact that I am a high fantasy fan. Like I want people using magic to open the door, and your book didn't have, you created a very solid fantasy world without magic around every corner. And yet it was still, for me, I still was like incredibly engaged from the very, very beginning. Mm-hmm. And you created this hyper organized world but yet magic popped up enough to where I'm still like, yeah, you dangled that lure to where you knew somebody's having something happen. And then when you brought it around, it was such a subtle piece. And like a little part where like I had to be like, what happened? And go reread that spot again and to pick up on where it happened. And I thought it was brilliant.
Thank you.
It definitely grabbed you and you were like, well, now I got to check out the next story.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. And that's a scary part is book 2. Mm-hmm. Because, that you've heard about the sophomore slump and the problems. So I was glad I was able to write book 2 before book 1 came out. Because there wasn't any kind of expectation. Like if book 1 did really well, then I'd have all this pressure to make sure I did better. Yeah. And then if book 1 really tanked and was horrible, then I'd have all this pressure, that it's terrible. Nobody's going to read it anyway. Yeah. So.
Or the pressure of like, oh, you wrote the book, you wrote book 1 and now everyone's like, give me more. And you're like,
yes. Yes, and with the publishing schedules, like I was able to have book 2 all ready to go before because they were publishing it like once a year because that was like a normal publishing schedule for the major publishers. And Harlequin with the Luna books, they had like a whole the first year they had all their authors lined up like 2 years beforehand. So when they bought my book, I didn't come out till like the second year that they were. Because they had like Misty Lackey and a bunch of other Robin Owens, a bunch of other bigger names that were coming out with stuff before. So it was fun. Laura Ann Gilman, she had one in that first year too, and Michelle Segara. I think that's how you pronounce it.
One thing that I was really interested in with this book was you see a lot in especially like the fantasy novels or like high fantasy, low fantasy, whichever. Usually, it's kings and lords and ladies, but you chose to have sort of like a authoritarian, like military leader in place that like a post like successful coup, like uprising of the common folk sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Like I know you mentioned that you did that from the standpoint of like wanting to show something that like hadn't been done before. What made you decide is that what made you decide to go that route with the like sort of different government structure? Or
yes, I thought that there's so many fantasy books out there with monarchs and everything, and yes, they're really popular, but again, I wanted to have something that was a little different. Yeah. And I like the idea of there was a monarchy and it was overthrown. Yeah. And that it's more of a very the commander's in charge now. I mean, he came in on the screen pretty fully formed. I wanted somebody who was powerful but yet very like pragmatic and very utilitarian, like not excess. That actually was a good thing that happened to the world, even though it seems kind of weird because everybody's like has to wear a uniform and their freedoms are getting taken away. Yeah. But yet at the same time, they've all got jobs.
It's very interesting because a lot of times when you see that like that sort of authoritarian, like
because like I am the king mentality,
like the Stalinic like sort of figure. He's like at the same time as them being like ruthless towards like those who break the rules. He's also I don't know if I should use the twist ending or not, but the commander is very is very, like you said, pragmatic, where they don't like if they understand that things happen sometimes, and like there's gray within their black and white world that they've set up.
Right.
It was the farmer that he What happened?
Valek saved Farmer,
Valek
but
saved
the
the
commander
farmer.
didn't know about that.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
The commander didn't know about that. Well, see, because of those shades of gray, the commander believed that if you got caught stealing, this is your punishment.
Yeah.
And it should go across the board. There's no good old boy network. There's no corruption. There's no bribery.
Yeah.
You steal, you spend 3 years in jail. That's it.
Yeah.
You do this, you spend this many years in jail. It's like it's black and white there. And it's same with like if you kill somebody, you get killed. That's it.
Yeah.
That wasn't. Sorry, go continue.
I was going to say, but then Valek, he's kind of like, well, it can't really be that black and white. So he kind of like does a little bit more of like, well, this is, it was an accident that the guy had, and so he shouldn't be punished.
Yeah.
And so Valek will go behind the commander's back and smooth things over.
Well, and then there was the part with the girl that the math teacher brought before the commander.
Right.
She was unruly in class because she, was bored, and she knew better than the math teacher because she was brilliant in maths or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of being like, well, you were bad in class, therefore you're out or whatever. He was prove that you're good at what you're actually doing. Why did you misbehave, or why did you talk back to teacher or whatever?
Right.
Yeah.
It's an interesting dichotomy because you see him who's enforcing this black and white. There is an absolute justice. These are these things, but even he is seeing the need for gray, even if it's in smaller, measures, but you see it. And, it's even at the end when he says, I'm putting this out, but I'm not going to put it for a couple days or, whatever it may be. And so, but even Yelena in the beginning, right, she has the same mentality. It doesn't matter what the circumstances were around her actions. That's what she did. And so she has, you watch her kind of soften and find that gray throughout the narrative. You see her development, but you also see her not shy away from what she's done and what it means, even when there are times I just want to scream just say it, say it. Everyone will they'll stop treating you like a murderer. They'll stop calling you a murderer. Just say it. And
because
she is behind that absolute of this is right and wrong is wrong, and I accept my consequences. And so it's this really interesting dynamic between the need for gray, but the clinging to that absolute system.
Right. Yes, and I didn't realize this until my sister read the book. It was still before it was published, and she read it, and she goes, "This is like Catholic school."
That's why you like it.
And too.
Yeah,
both of them went to Catholic school.
Yeah, and then when she said that, I was like, oh yeah, because everybody wears a uniform, and there's the general. She goes, yeah, that's the nuns. And then I was like, what about the commander? And she goes, that's Sister Seraphim.
That's amazing.
Which was this really scary principal of our school.
Yeah.
That's
so it doesn't have fit. It makes a lot of sense. And I didn't realize I had done that. But I never minded wearing a uniform to school. Never, ever. Because it just made my life so easy in the morning. Because if you're not a morning person, it's there's no thought about what am I going to wear today, or did I wear this recently, or any of that stuff. It was just so nice.
Just, do I pick a red, white, or yellow polo in the morning?
Yeah. No, we didn't even have that. We had just the girls were very very strict. We had one option.
Oh.
Yep. One you had blouses underneath the jumper, and this jumper was made out of this polyester that could probably, for radiation, I bet you it would have repelled radiation because it was so thick.
Yeah.
And that material did never fade it. It never. We handed those uniforms down. I bet you there's still people wearing the uniforms that we wore 30 years ago.
Yeah. I haven't changed either. So.
Shirts. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did not have a uniform.
Oh, he didn't go to Catholic school. He went to.
I went to public school. I went to a wildly Protestant school. No, it was Pentecostal, but we were Protestants. But yeah, one of the things like do you ever think where you got your inspiration for like the locations? Like she said she read it and it reminds her of Catholic school. And
Yeah, well,
one of the things that sticks out really strong is when they go to the fire market.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, like, where did that inspiration for that place come from? It feels like Renaissance fair and like county fair, like slammed together into one thing.
The fire festival. Yes. Yeah, it was like, I'm trying to think of something that would happen in the summer that, kind of gave everybody an excuse to have, like, if the commander was in charge, if the commander had his way, he'd never pay for all that. But Valek insisted that they needed some bit of frivolity. Yeah. And so he grudgingly agrees to have it. And it's like a way to like blow off steam and things like that. And I just thought it'd be a fun little, it's kind of a nod to fantasy worlds, like you said, a Renaissance fair, very much similar to that. And like also like a local, fair. We have our local fair here, and it's a big deal here in our small town at the fair every year, of everybody going and putting in like their crafts to get judged for ribbons and things like that. So yeah, it was just, something like that. And of course then, with fantasy, you get to do fun things like fire dancers and things like that. So
it definitely felt like the Boone County Fair. That's where I'm also from a small town. She's from Chicago and I'm from a tiny town of 700 people. And so they lived for the fair in August. But, it's a big deal. Especially if you had like a prize winning cow or something. Oh, yes, people did that, Melissa. I tell her about like country living and she's like, what?
Yeah. And then the local restaurants would have the winners of these cows and pigs and everything on the menu the next week.
Yeah.
Everything I learned about small town living was from him and Hallmark. So I grew up in Philadelphia, so I was definitely a city girl. So when I got out here and I married my husband, he was like, "Oh, the fair's coming, and he was so excited about the fair. And I like walked around and I was like,
why do I care? I don't want to ride any rides.
yeah.
And you're like, but no. I was like, honey, you get to look at cows. And she's like, what? I was like, just bear with me for a second.
But then so it was like, I looked at the cows looked at me. It was like, oh, okay, why was he so excited? But then I realized when our kids were little, it's like a big deal to go out and see the cows and like not be eating at home, that you can go and eat like, funnel cake and all kinds of really bad stuff for you. And
dogs. And,
I still get
milkshakes.
Cotton candy and lemon shake-ups. Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I just like anything, for some reason, anything deep fried at the fair, you're like, this is great.
Yes. So that's what they do. So that's probably the inspiration for that. I wanted to show more about the ice festival, but I never had a scene or anything important happening in the cold season.
Yeah. That's always, especially in fantasy, it's always harder to, I found as a reader, to understand like what goes on in the cold, because it seems like, I remember I'm a big fan of R.A. Salvatore. I mean, in his Driz saga, I don't know if you've read that one, but
no.
It's like if you play Dungeons and Dragons, you have to read it because it's all at the Forgotten Realms and everything. But all the cold is it's literally just pages and pages of how many layers of cloaks you're wearing. And I've never read
how much wood you have to chop up to prepare for winter, and then staying around inside eating the same food every day.
Yeah, a lot of roaring fireplaces and a lot like I imagine that would be very difficult. So that would be very difficult to understand. So
yeah, I do have in the glass books. They do go up to the northern ice sheet where they have problems with blizzards. Coming in off of it, which makes life even harder for them. And I do have my storm dancers, which they can harvest energy from storms and bottle them in orbs and then use those orbs to fuel their factories.
We were talking about that one just a little bit ago because Ben and I were talking about that because you, it said you took glass blowing classes.
I did.
Understand. So that's like, that's fantastic. I am a hobbyist blacksmith. Ben is a hobbyist blacksmith. So, like, the fact that you took a little bit of time to learn gives that realism to the story. Because nothing more frustrating than, like, to hear a person He's like, I forged this sword, at a campfire with a rock. No, you didn't.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
I try and do all as much hands-on research as I can. So with the whole glass blowing, especially if I was going to write 3-book series and my main character was a glass magician, I figured I needed to know everything I could about it. So I went and I learned how to blow glass and work with glass, and I even did stained glass and fused glass, and made beads, like those little glass beads, which is just this flame that's like pure white. And you're like, what do I do? It's this close to my face, and you want me to do what?
Yeah.
It was really scary because it was attached to this nozzle and this thing.
Yeah, I read your biography in preparation for this. I saw you've done glass blowing, horseback riding, fencing. You took some Ishinryu karate. Like, what else have you done as your hands-on research for your books? Or
Well, that's a lot. I've gone and toured a correctional facility.
That was the one I was forgetting. Yes.
Yeah. No, that was interesting. Yes. My friend, she's retired now, but was a correctional officer in a men's maximum security.
ooh,
And that was really interesting to go in and see and hear all her stories about the inmates and stuff like that. So that was really interesting. And it was kind of scary at the same time, because there was a lot of times when, well, especially in the open population that wasn't the max security, or actually it's called special unit. And then there's the RU, which is like one step down. But then you're walking around and there's like 50 prisoners and there's like 3 of us. And like nobody's armed. And I'm like, what happens if they decide to do something? And she's like, oh, we'll protect you. And I'm like, yeah, but who's going to protect you? Because like there's nothing between us. And this is one of the place that I toured was Camp Hill, which had the big riots back in like 91 or 92, something like that. So it was really interesting. And I learned a lot from that. That I was able to use. And I had a bunch of correctional officers come to my book signing and thank me for getting it right.
Yeah.
Because they, everybody's like, oh, prison guards. And they're like, no, guards work at the mall. We are correctional officers.
Yeah.
Like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, when you get it right, people appreciate it.
Right.
it allows for the immersion in the story, because when you get that one part that's like the eyebrow raising, you're like, what is this? We have a thing that we enjoy joking about, where she'll bring excerpts from badly written female characters written by men.
Oh, yeah.
And she'll bring it in, and they're just so eye rolling.
Yeah.
So and it's one of those, it's jarring as the reader, where they're like I don't, or vice versa, and you're like, I've never had that thought one time.
Yeah. I try with my books. I have beta readers that have kind of a varied background, but my husband is definitely one of my beta readers, because he's really good about finding those plot holes. And he's found a lot of plot holes in my books that I'm able to fix before they go out into the world, and people can comment on them. And also have my daughter, who, when she was younger, like in her teens, like high school, since I had so many young adult readers, I mean, I didn't start out writing for the YA, because back when I started this, YA fiction wasn't a thing. So this was going to be for adult fantasy readers. And sorry, I just got distracted by the thing. But when my
cut off.
So that my daughter will pick up and say, oh, nobody would ever say this or never think about this or do that. So she was really good about giving me feedback about that as well. Yeah, do we have a limit? Are we?
No, we'll be fine.
Okay.
I saw that you in one of the things it said that the first one came out when Twilight came out. So you were right in the height of that YA craze, maybe not the vampire craze, which Ben loves so much. He's a Twilight fan. But it's just interesting how I wouldn't necessarily target it for YA. But it's because there are some trigger warnings. right? Like,
Right, there is. And I would never have written that. I mean, she needed a good excuse or a good reason to kill Riyadh, right?
Right.
Excuse me. I'm just getting I need to plug in.
Like what would convince you? She needed a reason that would like get her to override all of her programming and commit a murder.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So she needed a really good reason, and I thought that would be a good reason, but I never would have I would have made it more vague and not as detailed if I knew that I had people under like 18 reading it. Yeah. I had no idea, but like Poison Study came out the same exact month that Twilight came out, October 2005. And I started getting all these emails from readers, young readers, that they loved my book, and they were asking me, have you read Twilight? And it's like, well, no, I hadn't. But now that I've been hearing all this about it, and, and she is, the main character starts out about 19, which in fantasy is an adult kind of age because, everything happens a little younger there because they don't live long.
Yeah.
But then the main Valek, who wasn't supposed to be the love interest, he was 31 or 32 in there because he had to have some skills behind him. Like he wasn't going to be like somebody who was just I guess he could have been a prodigy, but I didn't, I wanted him to be at least like 17 or 18 during the takeover. So then I had to double his age for now. So then people were like, well, this isn't a YA because, she's 19, he's 31 or something. And I'm like, well, okay, that's fine. But then my publisher put a YA cover on it and sold it as YA a couple of years later. And I was like, well, let me fix it. And they're like, oh, it's fine. I'm like, no, it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But now that I know I have younger readers, and I do tend to fade to black or to be a little bit more, conscious of that. But my daughter tells me that most kids, when they see stuff they don't want to read, they just skim it or they skip it.
Yeah.
So they self-censor because they're like, oh, that's yucky. I don't want to read about that.
Well, and like if you were to have published it today, right, like it would be new adult. It would be like,
yes,
like we were joking about ACOTAR earlier, like that was shelved as YA, which is very not YA.
Very much not YA, no.
So, there is this new kind of market that, has emerged that maybe wasn't around, a little bit over 15 years ago, 17. I think.
Right. Yeah. And when people start fussing about their age difference, which I think is funny, I'm like, yeah, well, they're about, 13 years apart. I go, but Edward and Bella are like 75 years apart.
More
yeah. That's the part.
He might look like he's 18, but he's really like 110 or something like that.
This was the part we've talked about this before on the show. It's like vampires. It always gets a little icky.
Yeah, it does. Well,
we start talking about ages.
Fairies.
Yeah, like in a Court of Thorn and Roses. Like, how old are you? I'm 500 years old. I'm 19. That's gross.
Yes.
I barely have anything in common with somebody who's 10 years younger than me.
Yes.
Even Discovery of Witches, she's 30, but he's been around since like pre-Crusades.
Yes.
And you're like, what are you talking about?
I'm 1500.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a bunch of series like that because I don't know how I would. I mean, when I could barely date guys my own age in high school. They were all so immature. And that was the thing.
Imagine.
That was the thing people asked me because as a teacher and a writer, like, why was those Twilight books so popular? And I was like, well, have you met teenage boys?
Yeah.
I mean, Edward compared to them, I mean, they're like in their own little world and they don't have any money. And some of them don't bathe quite as often as they should.
Or even just use deodorant.
Yes. So, when you have somebody coming in who has a nice car and treats you nice and actually pays attention to you and it's funny. Like my son was always on his own little world and everything, would not notice anything. Compared to my daughter, she was
of that right now.
Yeah. Well, yeah. If you have 3 boys, and
oh.
But
well,
even
one of them had their friend spend the weekend with us, and their conversations, we just look, and I'm like, did we go wrong? The stuff they talk about, you're like, what is happening?
But
yeah,
and they're good kids.
The
Yeah, I used to drive the soccer, the kids to soccer practice. And for some reason, they thought that when I was driving, I could no longer hear. So I'd be driving and there'd be like 4, 15-year-old boys in the back just talking about what 15-year-old boys talk about. And I'm like, you do not realize that your mother's sitting here? And then I went home to my husband and said, told my husband, be careful what you say to your son, because he's repeating everything word for word to his friend.
Yeah.
So, but that was nice because it gave me a lot of fodder for my younger characters, especially Yelena's older brother, the annoying older brother. We had that whole dynamic going on in my house for years. In fact, we still get it when they're both home.
Yeah. Even re-listening to it, you're just like, you twinge a little bit, and it feels really realistic. And that's the thing is even with their age difference, there's the power. Back to Yelena and Valek, there's a power imbalance, right? But somehow it balances out, but they also feel like equals in some ways.
Yes,
they are very they balance each other in the ways that they need to be, right? And so it feels really authentic to me, and that's probably why I keep coming back to it, because the relationships is what interests me, and their relationship is very, even though it's not the primary plot of the book, it is, I liked how you said earlier, it was, secondary, kind of, but it still felt like enough and real enough to, keep that interest and keep driving through 6 books, I think.
Yes. With those two.
I think what ends up happening is Valek, when it gets to that point where there's feelings happening, Valek, gets rid of the power imbalance. He tells her oh, by the way, it was just it's gonna give you a tummy ache, but you'll live. And you find out this whole time, and he basically ends the power imbalance and then change how he treats her. So. I think that's what.
Yeah, and it's been interesting. It's been interesting writing it from his point of view.
Yeah,
I would love to see that one.
I think you weren't here yet, Missy. Maria was telling us how she's currently writing a poison study from the point of view of Valek.
Mm-hmm. Do you have an estimated publish?
The goal is April, about mid-April, early to mid-April in there. That's the goal, but we'll see. I'm working on it now. I have about I'm about 60% of the way.
Yeah. I think it'll be fast because the story gripped you in the very beginning where she's in jail and then they're like, "You're gonna die anyway. You want to check for poison?" To see how he's filtering through all these people. And just being that's my girl right there. That's the one. That's the one we're going to offer this to.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't it mentioned that he had a different option to choose as the next taster, and he purposefully chose her? Or
I think he's been kind of keeping her off the list as the next person.
Yeah.
And bringing other people out. It's everybody who's been sentenced to death. So he's been he has this pool of people and he keeps not picking her until, the current taster dies and they need somebody, and then he thinks it's good timing to bring her out. And, so Valek does have that control over who goes next.
Yeah.
And
Purple Fox official says that they are so excited about his point of view.
Oh, good. I'm glad, the reason I'm writing it is because of my readers. Mm-hmm. They have been so, they love Valek and they want more. And, they want more of every character. That's the thing. It's so nice. My secondary characters are very fully developed as well, but everybody wants a story, then write Ari and Jenco's story, and then I want to hear about, the commander needs his own novel, surely. Yeah.
He needs his own thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The commander's incredible.
Yeah.
And that was I really liked the commander, and I had different plans for him, but as I write the book, sometimes the characters decide they're going to do things differently and everything, and I didn't originally think that Yelena and Valek would get together. I thought they'd be more colleagues,
Yeah.
something like that. I wasn't, yeah, and it just didn't happen because I think when you said about, it's like a more natural progression of the romance, because it's kind of like it's kind of like they became friends first, and then, and it's very equal. I did that on purpose, that, yes, he rescues her, but she also rescues him.
Yeah.
Once she's learned how to fight and everything. And I'm a big believer in like showing the process, like that it's not going to become overnight. Like, you can't just pick up a sword and start fighting with it right away. Like in some books, that drives me crazy. I like to be authentic. All my fight scenes are realistic because I have that Ishinru background and I have that sword fighting background. I also learned how to fight with a broadsword and a rapier,
awesome.
Yeah.
Can I ask, so I actually am trained in Shuriru. How much is your background in Ishinru? Because I know they're kind of sister systems.
Yeah, well, it's an Okinawan style. I went all the way to brown belt.
Okay.
I was very close to getting my black belt, but then I had kids, and then there you go.
I understand. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I got my black belt in Shuriru right before I went to college, so I have about 14 years of active training. I haven't been able to find a school close to me that I could train at, but been trying.
Yeah. I wanted to get back to it because I really did want to get the black belt. But I come to a point in my life where I'm a teacher.
Yeah.
And when you have some 16-year-old kid trying to teach me something, and of course every style wants you to start as a white belt again. And it's like, I know all the basic stuff. Like,
it's hard.
It's pretty frustrating. So I'll just stick with my brown belt.
Yeah, exactly.
It matches my hair.
I was just curious because I saw the Ishinru in your bio, and I was like, "Oh, I know that one."
Yes, yes. It's a hard style, which is very, it's not very flowery, like Taekwondo with all the spinning kicks and stuff. That's part of it.
Don't get me started.
So, Purple Fox official also said Fisk, that they would like, a POV from Fisk. So. Keep that in mind. But, as you think about, you said you're going back through Valek's perspective, what, and so it might be a little bit easier to go back in time. What's your favorite, do you remember, or like now or then, what was your favorite part to write?
On Poison Study, my favorite part?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I do like I liked it when Ari and Jenco were on screen because they have that banter and the humor that they bring. So it kind of balances out the more serious sections. Mm-hmm. So they're fun, but I think a whole novel with them would be a little bit too annoying.
I can see that.
Yes.
Especially with the rhyming, like,
Mm-hmm.
like, and I understand, I like, how you talk about how it's intentional to throw people off balance and to underestimate, right? And
right.
So it's a lot of performative, but I could see that.
Yeah. Yeah. Jenko has become a favorite character of mine just because he comes up with some really random stuff that just doesn't, but I think it brings a nice balance in. And I also love some of Valek's one-liners. I mean, they were a lot of fun, and like, they're not planned. My books are not planned. I get a basic idea of what I want to do, and I have an idea of what might happen. But when I sit down and write, things happen that I'm not expecting. Now, with this book, of course, I have to follow the plot of what's on the page with her and Valek. But when she's doing stuff and you don't know where he's at, then I can have some fun.
Yeah.
And that has been fun, figuring out what he's doing and working on. And the humor, I like, like I said, I don't really plan for the humor, but when it comes out, I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you an outliner, or are you kind of when you're starting from scratch? Are you an outliner, or are you a kind of see where it goes?
I'm going to see where it goes. I might jot down some notes about, what might be coming, or some scenes that I might have. Yeah. No, we when you're telling your stories, when you're running the campaigns, you have a basic
I know where I'd like them to go, and I hope it gets there. But for the most part, I don't. For the most part, it's just kind of like the story tells itself, and then Ben tries to ruin whatever plans I have.
And you do the same thing to Ben.
I would never do that. I'm very respectful of Ben's plots. Ben, you are muted.
You are muted.
It's like, thank you, Missy. She knows.
I don't feel that's correct. I feel that's correct. I stay on task constantly with my stories that I tell.
Are you all? Do you
I
also?
identify with that feeling she is feeling right now at a deep personal level.
So like when I'm planning a camp, like a session, I have story beats that I want, like that. I'm like, all right, I think people are gonna do this, and I know. So that's a nice thing about like the way we do is like those 2-hour little slots, is because like it's easy to kind of plan out 2 hours of D&D, you know. Like, you can, like, people can't screw up too many things in a 2-hour spot unless they, like, decide to go, like, way off the rails.
Yeah.
So the way it works is, you know, all right, I know where they're at. I know I know where I want them to be. If they follow that path, great. If they don't, then this is where we get into weird territory.
She desperately wants to be part of this.
Yeah, because a lot of times what ends up happening is, you know, sometimes what ends up happening is everyone decides, like, you know, you end up with a little bit of Ernest Hemingway, and you've got like the well-traveled path, and then the path that's like, you know, covered in sunshine and rainbows, and then they're like, that I don't like. I'm going to go this way that is covered in brambles and thorns, even though the DM really did a really good job of making it look like I don't want to go that path, but I'm going to do it anyway because fuck you, Ben.
And that's just how we all live our life. Our mantra is fuck you, Ben. Sorry.
Yeah. Thanks for the follow, Ailey. Maria had to step away real quick. She'll be back in a little bit, but we're just talking about Dungeons and Dragons in the meantime.
Yeah, and I'll pivot. When I write, like, I don't outline, like, you know, like, and I think my work is a little bit easier.
That's the thing with D&D. Like, it's a different sort of writing thing. You know, like you have the beats that you like want to hit. You have these things where these bits of information that you want to pass off to the characters, but at the end of the day, if the character doesn't, you know, look in this chest, or the character doesn't open up this room, you can't just like give the information over, you know. But like as an author, like you have control of the character like fully, and like they have to, you know, follow that path.
Yeah.
I have found, like, because I love stories, like I that's my whole point, but like playing Dungeons and Dragons has actually taught me how to tell a story, and then how to move when something happens. And that's a question that we took a side conversation while you were getting your drink, and I hope
Sorry about that.
Oh no, not a problem at all.
No,
I warned you. I was allergic to air.
We are 100%. We've got all of our distractions are acting up right here. She just wants to be held. Like, she doesn't care what's going on.
Well, that's fine.
Yep. But is there anything you practiced? Like, how did you practice getting? Because I don't think you were able to like just wake up one day and just crank out 100,000 words onto a book. Did you have anything you did to kind of like practice your storytelling? Were you a storyteller by nature? Like, I was raised by a storyteller. My dad would tell stories all the time, so like I told stories.
Yeah. Well, I grew up reading. My mom got me hooked on books pretty young age, so I was always a big reader, and also then I was also very creative. I danced. I acted in the high school plays. I played the cello. I did a lot of creative things. But, I wasn't confident in those creative abilities. I knew I wasn't going to be the next Yo-Yo Ma or,
Right.
The next Julia Roberts. And so I went into science because I know I was good at math and science, and I was really fascinated with the weather and wanted to go in that direction. But I started writing short stories because I've always had like daydreams about things, and I would think of things and I'm like, oh, this would make a fun story. So let me try and write it. And so I think I probably wrote about 14 or 15 short stories before I went and started a novel.
Were they always fantasy, or did you dabble in different types?
They were, most of them were science fiction.
Oh, really?
A good part of them were science fiction. And then there was some fantasy mixed in as well. I shouldn't say this because I do have a short story collection out.
Oh, nice.
of my published short stories. I finally pulled them all together into one collection, and I called it Up to the Challenge. Because in between writing books, I would get invitations to anthologies. Like, can you write a story about a vampire? And I'm like, I don't know, can I? Because, the vampires were all the thing there for a while. And so they're like, yeah, can you give me a vampire story? And I'm like, well, do they have to be good vampires? And she said, they could be whatever you want it. And I was like, ooh, fun. So I had vampires and I had fencers. And I wrote a story called Sword Point about fencers that use wooden swords instead of the metal.
Oh.
Cool.
Yeah. Oh.
That's awesome.
Okay.
And so that's why I called it Up to the Challenge because, can you write a horror story? Can you write about werewolves? And yes, by then I had learned, how to write a short story, but it took me especially short fiction is a lot harder to write, I think.
Yeah.
Than
Why
the
is
long
that?
form.
Why do you find that more challenging?
Well, because you only have a small number of pages to show your character. And a lot of people show backstory, they have world building, but in a short piece, you really can't do all that. You can't have the subplots. You just have to have that one little slice of life. And I think that's really hard to do.
Yeah. And make it
Never think about it like
make it
six
draw
word
draw a reader in. Like it's a very much different form of writing because you have to get the reader interested without any of the fluff of like, oh, I spent 50 pages making you like the person. Now but
Yeah,
you've got a very short amount of time to get the reader drawn in and interested in what happens next, and then you have an equally small amount of time to actually end the story.
Right. And make it an ending that's satisfying.
Yeah. So I think that's what's interesting. So I'm getting a little bit off topic here maybe, but last week we covered the Foundation by Isaac Asimov. What's interesting with that book is it's a series of 4 different I don't know if it's novelettes or short stories technically, but he published it in 5 parts in a science fiction magazine, but it was all one greater work that all meshed together. But each one of those sections resolves itself within that section, and I think that's I feel like it's part of why why Asimov is one of the greatest science fiction writers that's ever he's basically the father of science fiction, and it's why it's persisted is he figured out how to this is one novel, but it's also 5 parts that are their own thing,
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's how I look at my series. I call them series, not trilogies, even though it's tend to be 3 books, because I try and give the readers a beginning, middle, and end in each book. And it's just like a TV series, because if you think about it, each in a TV series, they're dealing with different things. But overall, there's there's always that one thread that's going through it all that they figure out towards the end. So
yeah,
and that's what I tell a lot of my students is. Before you can binge things on Netflix.
Right. You had to wait week after week after.
Yeah, you had to wait. But think about also where they put the commercials in. Right? When you used to watch it.
Tension point,
Right.
That's where you had the chapter.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And that's what I would tell my students. But now, of course, finding things with commercials is a little harder these days. But
I think the most annoying things about those books where they decide to end the chapter at the highest drama point is when it's 2 a.m. I'm trying to go to sleep, but I can't stop.
Yes. I've had many emails from people at 3 or 4 a.m. telling me that they just couldn't go to sleep and they finished my book and it's all my fault. They're going to be grumpy at work. And I'm like, I'm not sorry.
Praise, though.
Sorry, not sorry.
No,
Right?
not sorry.
Oh, you knocked it out. Responsibility. There's another one coming.
Yeah.
So
Just wait.
yeah, just wait. There's more. I'm never sleeping.
Yeah, you have to stop reading in the middle of a chapter because if you wait till the end of the chapter, then that's almost impossible.
Yeah.
I have one question. I did it through Audible, which was a wonderful voice. Voice it.
Gabber Zachman, I think.
Yeah. Do you pick do you get to pick who's going to read your book? Like, do they offer, do you want to read your book, or do you get to select who's going to be the voice of your book?
Well, I didn't for Poison Study. They had assigned Gabra Zachman as my narrator. And I was so lucky that they did because she did a fantastic job.
She really did.
Yeah. And she made sure, like, she had the producer call me and ask me how to pronounce certain names because she wanted to make sure it was right. So that was really nice. Now, when we got to the Glass books and it was a new protagonist, they gave me like 3 names of people that I could pick from. And I listened to the different ones and I picked one from there because we wanted to have like a different voice for Opal than Yelena. But then, Gabra's so talented. After that, I just used her for almost all my novels. Now, I did find, and Gabra and I are now good friends. And I've seen her a couple times. She lives up in New York City and I've been up there. And for Valek's story, I wanted to go with a male narrator. So I went to Gabra and said, well, who do you recommend? And she gave me a couple of names and I listened to them and I found one I liked. And then I emailed him and asked him if he was interested. So so now I have complete control over my narrators. But
awesome.
When I first starting out, no, I just happened to get Gabra and it was just really good luck.
I've read that a lot of times the authors don't necessarily interact with the VAs for their audiobooks.
No, especially if it's done through a big publisher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I've done I've listened to LibriVox and where they have volunteers. And there were some books that I personally loved. And the voice actor was just so bad that you're like, I can't. I was curious, like how do you go through it? Like we're lucky enough we live next door to Meg Jensen, who's written Dragonlands.
Oh.
She is a very, very. She also is on Audible, and her she also got lucky. The VA was very articulate and very well done. So that makes the story. If you're listening to it, you don't want to hear somebody who can't articulate or.
Yeah, it's very important to get a good narrator, and so that if you have control, or if you get to a point in your career where you have a little bit more of a say, then to exercise that because when you're first starting out, you have really no say.
You're gonna do what the publisher says. The publisher says this is what's gonna happen. And
and that audiobooks weren't a real big thing back then. Like Audible was its own company.
Yeah.
Purple Fox just posted that they've been up many a night finishing up just one more chapter.
Good.
And that one is capitalized. Just one more chapter.
Oh, I had the cutest story. I was doing a signing at a bookstore, Cupboard Maker Books, which is like my local independent bookstore that I do a lot with them. And I was there on a signing or something, and I wasn't really paying attention. And all of a sudden, somebody slams down a copy of Poison Study in front of me, and it's like kind of startled me. And I looked up, and it was this young man. He was about 14. His black hair was like all kind of messy, and he had this like shine in his eye, like kind of like a glassy-eyed look. And I'm like, oh. And I'm like, what? And he
We're gonna
went,
have a problem.
are we going to have a problem here? And then he went, first all-nighter.
That's adorable.
And so I was like, does your mother know? And he's like, no. And I'm like, I signed a book. I said, you're going to go home and go to sleep. And he's like, yes.
That's awesome. How does that feel? Like,
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
I would imagine.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Well, I mean,
you have a young man like that.
Was dedicated enough to her work that he forwent sleep over reading the book.
Right. Yeah, that is nice when I get those. And, they just kind of happen.
Yeah.
I never really expected any of this. I was just happy people were reading my book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know they'll be rereading it and, getting inspired by it and, lots of things like that, which just happened. Yeah, staying up all night.
Yeah. Now you've got entire pages on social media dedicated to it, and it's got quite a bit of a following, and
yes.
And now you got to travel all over the world to talk about it.
Yeah, that is fun. Yeah. And, and I'm making my living at it, which is really nice.
That's pretty awesome. Making a living telling stories. That would be, because especially in not to go into any of the topics that are plaguing us today, it's nice to be able to have a conversation about something that is pure entertainment. And that's why I like fantasy we get inundated with negative stuff all over the place. Every time I wake up in the morning, all my notifications are various nonsense. And it's nice to pick up a book and suddenly you're in space as the 75-year-old rejuvenated, soldier, or you're living and you're attending the fire festival. And that to me is just so exciting. And I feel nowadays stories are much more important than they've been for so long, especially ones that get those warm and fuzzy feelings that you can attach to a character that has a positive end. And I think that's what drives me to them. Sorry, our dogs are messing with each other because everybody wants to be on the screen right now.
Yeah.
Fox official stated that people are naming their children and pets after your characters, like her dog Yelena, or
Yelena.
Like your dog Yelena.
Yes. That was really, really surprising. Yes, there's a couple little girls out there named Yelena and a couple little boys, Valek, who are Valek. My friend June named her son Valek. Oh, wow. And it's we're friends now. We weren't before, but that's the thing with the books is I've become friends with a bunch of people all over the world. They live in the UK. And, now her kids are my honorary grandchildren.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It is. And there's tattoos. The tattoos, too, are another thing where they tattoo the quotes or poison bottles or all kinds of stuff. It's amazing, really. And, very unexpected.
I've got Terry Pratchett on my shoulder, so.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, I got my.
There you go.
So.
That's your eye roll. Is your graded twin? I've tried to get her to
the world turtle.
That's it. She likes the rest of the story. Doesn't like the turtle.
I don't like the turtle. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, and I love the turtle. That's the weirdest thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things I was telling my parents about this, and my mother, who is the one that got me into fantasy. It's weird. I don't know if it'd be fantasy or sci-fi because it was the Dragon Riders of Pern, Anne McCaffrey. That was the first one I remember reading. And what was the stories that you remember? This is where you're this is my genre. This is my type of book.
Well, it's interesting because my mother got me hooked on mysteries. So I was reading Agatha Christie and Dick Francis and Elmore Leonard and a bunch, Robert Parker, a bunch of mystery and suspense. I think I was reading, who's the big suspense guy? Oh, The Bourne Identity. What was that?
Oh, yeah. And then...
Yeah, I can't... Robert Ludlum. There we go. And so I was reading all of those.
Reading those too.
Yeah. I read a bunch of those and I really enjoyed them. But then my sister started dating... who became her husband, Chris, and he was reading science fiction fantasy. So he started lending me books. And the first book he lent me was The Lathe of Heaven by Ursula K. Le Guin. And that just kind of like, that's kind of just like blew my mind. And then he was giving me like, On a Pale Horse by Piers Anthony. And then he just started, and I started reading more science fiction fantasy and less mysteries until it was like all science fiction fantasy, because I read The Lord of the Rings in college, which is probably why I didn't do as good on my transcript. I was like, well, I was too busy reading.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
I remember the day I got Lord of the Rings. It was 2 days before I started 5th grade.
Oh, wow.
I got Fellowship of the Ring, and I burned that thing in 2 days.
Wow.
And that was it.
I wanted to watch the movies that my mom and my sisters were watching all the time, and they told me that I couldn't watch Lord of the Rings until I could read the books. So then I read the books.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, they were fun.
No.
It's funny because Ben is hands down the youngest one of our group. So when he says
No, Will's younger.
she doesn't participate. So we tease Ben because he just turned 30. And when he says Lord of the Rings, he means the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings.
Oh, okay.
I watched the
horrifying cartoon ones that were from when I was around. That's the Lord of the Rings I remember. And with that like super creepy yet like all-encompassing animation. Like that was.
I watched those before I read the books, but
You're a small baby. They made a Lord of the Rings cartoon that was terrifying.
Yeah, I think the books, you have to read them when you have a lot more space in your head, because there's a lot of details. Like, I tried to reread them, and it was like, oh, no, it's just too much.
He is not afraid of the backstory.
there are a lot of names and languages and just like superfluous poems in there. That you're like, what does this even have to do with?
Some of them are all poems.
Yeah. That was a lot of, and people love that. But I wasn't as when I get a student who's writing epic fantasy. I mean, a good story is a good story, but when I see epic fantasy, I'm like, oh.
I think that's a question as well. Is where do you draw the line for backstory? Because like, when you can get going, I know just playing Dungeons and Dragons and the little bit of writing I've done, I mean, I've got a backstory on the blacksmith who's literally just supposed to be an alcoholic that does what you need him to do. Like, yet I know why he drinks and where he was at and like all this stuff. Where do you draw the line when you're creating a character? You're like, all right, that's enough. Like, they don't need this much. And where are you like, no, I need a lot more?
Well, it's all what happens on the page and what the plot is. If it becomes important, like if your blacksmith's just drunk and you just need him to be drunk because he's going to do this stupid thing, and fall over the kiln and set the village on fire, well, then that's all you need to know. But if you have him as a character that's important, then you're going to want to know more about why he drinks.
Okay.
So it all depends on the hierarchy of where they are in the story. And all, and I try not to put in too much backstory, but you do need a little bit. So I kind of like drip it in, like a little bit here, a little bit there, and it has to be relevant to what's going on in the story. So for shadow study, I was wanting to focus on Valek more than Yelena. Like the first 3 study books were pretty much Yelena's character arc. It was all on her point of view. It was all about her and her getting to a point where she had changed and everything. But then in the second set of books, I was more focused on Valek. Well, the thing is Valek, a lot went on when he was younger, but I didn't want to have all these flashbacks. Like, I didn't want to set the story like a prequel, because then Yelena wouldn't be in it and all the other characters that my readers liked. So I had to keep it in the present story time, but I had to give you a lot of more backstory about him because it was interesting. So I ended up doing flashbacks.
Yeah.
So I did a whole series of flashbacks to show you him learning how to become an assassin and what set him on that course and everything like that. But in order to trigger him for a flashback, it couldn't be random. So I had a new young assassin try to take his job. And so whenever she was doing something, he would be thinking, oh, I was never that cocky. And then he would start thinking about it. And when he was in learning, actually, he really was that cocky, that kind of thing. So I was able to use her, bringing her and her challenging him for his job to really let him start really thinking about his history and everything. And then I think the readers really enjoyed that. Shadow Study was really easy to write. It was like one of the easiest books to write because I was thinking about it a lot before I actually sat down and wrote it.
Right. And one of the things that I'm not a sci-fi person, right?
Okay.
Like I'm not like a high fantasy. Like it's not my thing. But what I love the most is that you built this world, but you didn't club us over the head with chapters of, just descriptions
in the beginning,
of what's going on, and here's this, and setting it up. It felt really organic, and the same with those flashbacks, right? The backstory. It feels organic because you weave it into the narrative in a way that makes you keeps you interested without being like, and then there was this family, and there are this, and here's everything, and they've had this for 7 years, and even back to what we talked earlier about the monarchy, right? Like, you set up this backstory, but it's a part of the story that keeps it propelling forward instead of just like making you stop and like establish this thing.
Right. Yeah. Because I'm only going to give you what the character is at that moment. Here she gets offered the job of a food taster because they need a new one. And this is part of the code of behavior. So you learn about the code of behavior just because it applies to her at this particular moment.
It was very, because again, I am a high fantasy fan, so, but I agree. I felt like,
Sorry.
I felt like the story it grew through Yelena's interactions. Like as she was moving around, like it felt like the world grew from her experience. And even though I am a high fantasy person and I like the stories that this lineage has been here for 40,000 years and they're descended directly from the gods and everybody uses magic for everything, that's fun. But it does get overwhelming. And at no point did I get the feeling of being overwhelmed in this story and needing to be like, okay, I got to stop and go back or maybe Google something for somebody who spent a lot more time researching, because we all have the Cliff Notes and reading Tolkien and what happened in this on the Third Age and blah, blah, blah. And yours didn't do that. Everything grew through the interactions, and the stories were told at the time you needed to know it.
That was done on purpose.
Yeah, it was done brilliantly.
Sorry, no, you're good. I feel like that's a trap that like a lot of like high fantasy or like even just regular fantasy writers fall into. Like, there's like a lot of times you'll like have a chapter or like multiple chapters where it's like, all of a sudden the main character gets sat down with the like wise old sage or something and is like, this is how the world works. This is how magic works. And it's just like 8 pages of like facts. Mm-hmm. It's like, not again.
Yeah.
Oh, the quiet tutelage of the master that just is like,
Yeah.
It's like here's the like.
Tolkien was so good for that.
You can just imagine with like in my head a lot of times what happens is like the old master turns around and pulls down like a whiteboard screen and points on the board stop it.
Yeah. I think too. Like a lot of times with writers do a lot of research and there's that temptation to want to like show how much we know about it because we're really excited about glass blowing and we really want to show you that I learned all this knowledge. But the thing is it can get really boring. So I tend sometimes that whole teacher, there is the one thing where, but like with the glass blowing, you have Yelena asking Opal, well, how does this work? Like, how do you get magic trapped in glass? Like, can you show me? And so she does. So not only is she informing Yelena about what's going on, but she's informing the reader as well. Mm-hmm. And then I have to get, all that right or else somebody's going to call me on it. Yeah. Unless I call it something else. Right. The horse people are the funniest.
Glass forming or...
But the people with the horses are funny because if you get something wrong with the horses, they let you know right away.
That is their universe, yeah.
Yeah. And, people like it when you get it right, because if you get that right, then they assume that everything else you're doing is right as well.
Yeah.
So, you want to create a suspension of disbelief. So you don't want to knock anyone out of your story by not having something right. So like the poisons that I picked, they're not real poisons because I couldn't find real poisons to do what I wanted them to do.
Right.
And
that's how you get flagged by the FBI.
Yes.
Searching for those things.
Right.
If you just like throw out like commonly known poisons and just add side effects onto there, then like people are gonna be like, that's not how that works.
Right, exactly. So you have to do it right, like with the lock picking.
Yeah.
I mean, it's correct. It's not a bobby pin like on the movies. It's a tension wrench and a diamond pick. And I did my research and I may or may not have practiced this on my neighbors, but we won't say anything about that. It's amazing what you can get online. That's all I will say.
As long as
But
you can't-
how many watch lists are you on now?
Excuse me?
How many watch lists are you on now?
Oh, probably a ton. I know that there's this one pediatrician that won't see my kids after a while. She just asked us to go away because I had a lot of really interesting questions for her. Well, I figured she was a doctor, but obviously asking doctors about eating flesh is not something most normal moms do, and I think my daughter now is scarred for life or something like that.
I could just imagine that. Hypothetically speaking, if I'm going to see the person, that's.
But now I have a
They're all
couple of
mandated
physicians.
reporters. They're like, this lady is crazy cannibal.
Yeah, this lady's asking me about eating flesh. We might have a problem here.
That's
But the internet wasn't as big then. But now I do have a few physicians that I can email and say, hey, if this happens, like, what would happen? So,
Well, you're
that
also
help?
a little bit more recognizable as an author, though, too. So
yeah.
it's not like you watch a lot of the shows where, like, telling a story. They're like one of the crime dramas where they pretend to be doing research, but they're really just cannibals. So, I mean, you at least have a ton of published work to be like, no, see this? This is for work.
Yeah.
But when you don't have anything, you just look like a crazy person.
And you never kill your husband because your browser history would give you away.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's why I said that life insurance policy the other day.
Yeah.
I see.
I think we're kind of coming up on the end of our normal time, unless Miss.
I'm okay with keep going.
More questions or?
No, we did get through more than 3. So I'm going to count as win.
Yeah.
That's great. And we asked everybody in the chat what was it? Purple Monkey? Purple Heart?
Purple Fox official.
Yeah.
They did just put a new comment. It says, this makes me want to reread the whole series again. I loved Honora, Onora. So I'm doing it to Honora.
She's that young hotshot assassin that comes to take Valek's job.
Okay.
So yeah, she was fun to write, and that's good. Well, thank you for reading.
She says she's one of your soul finders.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I think I know.
Yeah.
I have a couple of really loyal readers, and my Soul Finders is a Facebook reading group that we have, and when I said about doing a reading group, we put out some different names for the group. And they all seem to like the Soul Finders because, the whole quote with books gives a soul to the universe and everything. And also because Yelena ends up being a soul finder. So now that's our thing. Like, Lady Gaga has her little monsters, but I have my soul finders. And when I travel, I tend to meet up with a bunch of them, which is a lot. Yes.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, they're worldwide.
You'll have to let us know if you ever make it out to the Midwest, and maybe we'll figure them out.
You said Illinois?
Yeah, Illinois.
Yeah. We are in Naperville, and he is in Rockford.
Yeah.
But Chicago.
Naperville's about 40 minutes outside of.
Okay.
Yeah.
And she will take any excuse to go to the city because that is where her heart is.
Yeah.
She's a born and bred Chicago city girl.
And Purple Fox makes mention of if you ever make it to Portland. So.
Yes. Portland, I need to go to Powell's. I've been told it's one of the real big, used bookstore that everybody Like it's a big thing out there.
One, actually, yeah.
Rockford is totally.
It's on my list. That's on my list to go because there's I get a lot of readers who have found my books at Powell's. So
Okay.
yeah, okay.
Do you,
Thanks.
before we go, do you have like you've obviously have a ton of characters. Do you have an absolute favorite? Like this is your character,
And it
Like,
doesn't
when
have
you-
to be Poison Study.
No.
It can be from your other series. too.
anything. Like which is the character when you think of writing? You're like, this one's mine. You know, like
This is my favorite.
this is my favorite. None of you touch this one.
That's a good question because like they're like children. These characters, you know, you love them all for different reasons. But you know,
But
I have the most.
There is a favorite. You just
You
don't.
only have one. Ben.
I do really have a lot of fun writing Jenko's character.
Yeah.
I must admit, he's a lot of fun to throw in and put him in situations and everything. I think, you know, because he adds that humor and he's like, you know, goes off on tangents and things like that. One of the characters that really spoke strongly to me was Ara from my Navigating the Stars series. She was very much in my head, very loud. I had to write her first person present tense because she wasn't going to stand for a past tense story. She was going to tell you as it was going right now.
Well, that's awesome.
And then she breaks that third wall, like, you know, she talks to the readers. So I also really liked the way she was because I think she was a really good role model for younger people because a lot of times younger people won't speak up because they're afraid of being judged, you know, or they're afraid of getting in trouble or something. And she's like the opposite. She's like refuses to be ignored. And I think that's a good trait to kind of like let people, you know, that's a good trait, like to get in people's faces and like speak up and everything.
One of our viewers, Ailey, she's a new follower. I think you might have brought her over. Said, "Thank you, Maria, for creating such rich and magnificent stories. I chose Poison Study by pure luck in my bookstore many, many years ago, and I fell in love. I have to go. You are great."
Oh, thank you so much. That's so sweet. Yeah, it's always nice. And this is also recorded, right? You record these. So if somebody misses it, they can watch it later.
So they're recorded on Twitch, and we will be uploading. We do a little bit of sound and video editing and re-upload them to Spotify as a podcast as well as YouTube. So we'll send those links once those are ready.
Oh, absolutely.
So.
Yes.
And if you would like just the raw file, I can send you that too if you'd like it.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
I'll take the links. That's good for me. But that's my amount of tech savvy that I know.
Oh, this has been an evolutionary process for us. She actually has a degree in human computer interactions. So she is hands down and by far the most tech savvy of all of us. And
I don't help them.
No. She'll answer the questions, but we get to figure it out. So this has been a journey for us.
We kind of grope around in the dark trying to figure out what we're supposed to do. And sometimes we hit the mark. Sometimes we're like, never doing that again.
No lie. The first time we started recording, I didn't know this was a single direction microphone, and I would spin it around because I fidget. And so all my volume would be it'd be fine and then super quiet. And I didn't know that until like we're 30 some episodes in, and I kept being like, Ben, why aren't you recording our audio correctly?
Kept blaming me for it.
It was
because he kept turning his microphone around.
Oh wow!
Been a journey, and now we level everything and we balance everything out, and it sounds so much better. But it's been a journey. Our first couple episodes were hot garbage.
Our very first episode, I believe I did not click the box on Twitch that said, please record this. And that was lost. So
I think everybody with
only
the
like
pandemic.
The two people that watched actually saw our first episode. So.
Oh, wow. Well, that's better than none, right?
Yeah, right.
It's been a journey.
My wife and a friend of mine. So, yeah.
Well, I've had some book signings like that where it's the bookstore employees pretending to be customers because they felt bad for you.
Yeah, right. But I think we're gonna get wrap things up here.
Yeah.
Maria, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us. It was a delight. Again, we loved your book, and I'm sure when the new one comes out, we will be covering that on our show as well. We're planning on circling back and continuing this series. It's just we have a little bit of a round robin system where people
They pick
suggest
different
books, and Joel gets mad about it because now he has
Yeah, I want to complete the
8
series.
different
Like,
series that he's supposed to be reading now. So
Do that in his free time.
yeah.
Just this
What,
free time.
free time?
Look
Yeah.
at my free time. I'm currently coddling at this moment.
So
Yes,
but
is that true free time?
thank you very much for joining us. Is there anything you're wanting to plug or bring up for?
No, I'm always grateful when I have my readers, and I'm always grateful when they take the time to post a honest review. That's a very helpful and everything. And if you don't have time to read the new books, but if you purchase a copy and stick it on your to be read pile, that is also helpful, because then the publishers look at that, the sales for new books coming out. But it's hard because there's a lot of books out there, and not enough time to read them all. But I'm very appreciative of my readers, and thank you for inviting me on your show. It was a lot of fun.
It was a
you.
privilege for you to be here. It was great. Thank you so much.
Thank
Well,
you.
So nice getting to know you all.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Perhaps we'll talk again.
She
soon.
was the most excited.
Yeah, obviously.
Needed to be part of the whole thing.
Yeah. For anyone who's watching, if you liked what you saw, please give us a follow, or if you're even feeling really adventurous, give us a subscribe. We'll be back again on Wednesday, continuing our D&D campaign, and we will be back on Monday, where we will be talking about the book. What is the book? It's on my phone. It's by Richard Dreyfuss. It is Patrick Rothfuss. Wow.
Ooh.
The Name of the Wind.
Oh, that's epic fantasy. That is it.
Yeah. One of our members suggested it, and I pulled it up on my phone.
Yeah, it's huge.
29 hours.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you have the time, please be back. Please join us. We love talking about our books.
Oh, we just got As Now Brooke. Someday I will complete my Jenco-inspired D&D character. Two of my favorite things.
That's awesome.
And it has all come full circle.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a couple readers. There was one reader that was doing a D&D campaign using like my characters, I think.
Oh, that's amazing.
Good.
That's cool.
Yeah. It was.
That is
It was
awesome.
cool.
Yeah. Again, I just said that was cool.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't catch that.
But yeah, again, thank you everyone for watching. Thank you, Maria. We'll see you guys again soon. So.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for.
Thank you. Here, I'm going to use the bathroom and see what